Awesome.
We'll push through and we'll see what happens. It could get interesting. We could go wildly off topic. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to like give a rundown of your bio and chuck a few bits of applause in there, and then basically jump straight into it. And it's just like a question answer. Like if you don't want to answer something or you don't have like a clever answer for it, skip it and we'll fucking move on to the next one. Sound good to you?
Oh, yeah.
Sick. All right, we are recording. Hello everybody. I'm Sam, and today I'm talking to the wonderful, the lovely, the amazing Adrian B Earle. They are a writer and poet and media maker from Birmingham. They are the technical death metal of the poetic form, mildly obsessed with the taste of a poem and the things that can be created from the foundation or verse. He has been mashing together sonics and syllables, images and iams for a while now, and experimenting in creating digital poems under the name Think Write Fly, which is the name of his website, which you can check out. If you want to have a look at all his stuff, he is not everywhere yet, but like you'll find him in most places. Like he is one of the co-founders and previous publishing manager for the Poetry Birmingham Literary Journal, or PBLJ. He has done stuff with Verse First Productions, where he produces the podcasts Why Poetry and Alone Together. He is the creative development lead at the Poetry in Place app over here, and a 2019 member of the Hippodrome Young Poets. We're actually going to be talking specifically about his debut pamphlet, 5,000 Hertz, which is out with Burning Eye Books. And normally I'd say you can go to his website and collect it from him, but it sounds like you might have just sold out, which is really nice. So
it is a nice problem to have. Yeah.
So we've kind of touched on this briefly in the preamble, but first things first, for the audience at home, how the heck are you doing, man? How are you coping in this, the most blessed of timelines?
2020 squared is weird. It's been a couple of weeks in. I refuse. It's not a new year. Time is a construct. We can name things whatever we want to name things, and it's either 2020 squared or 2020b. 2020 harder. 2.5 remix. I don't know how. Like it's weird. It's really weird, man. Like there was that point. There was a point in 2020 when lockdown hit, when there was like that thing of like, oh, okay, so there's something really big happening in the world, and there's a thing when you're a poet, like, or maybe it's just me, but there's a point where you read so much kind of like epic verse about these really pivotal moments in history, where you're like, oh gosh, yeah, they must have just, the feeling when you were just there, like, writing verses in the back of a pickup truck fleeing the siege of Srebrenica, or as the Berlin Wall was coming down, like you must have just known that this really epic thing was going to happen, and that tension in the air. Turns out, no, you have no idea. You're sitting there going, oh, it's fine, we'll just bump that gig, we'll just bump it to June, it'll be fine, yeah, it'll be fine. Like the idea that like, oh, standing at a mic and performing poetry as like a thing you do to pay rent is gone now. It's just gone.
Yeah.
I had to think about what my last gig was, because I just didn't twig. It was neat. Like my wife Neat was chatting to me last year. It was like, do you remember your last gig? Like, do you remember your last gig? And I was just like, oh gosh, no. I don't think I did. Like I didn't, there was no part in my brain that was like, this is the last gig you're ever going to do.
Right. Yeah.
Actually. And it just didn't, and I'm still thinking about it now. Like, what did I perform on my last gig? What was the vibe? What did it feel like to put that on the mic?
That's gonna haunt you though, isn't it? Like if you go, if that just is the be all and end all for poetry, like, and you go, we're never performing live again, it's too risky. That was a lot. What the fuck did I do? Did I do myself justice?
Yeah. Was it a great gig? I don't even know.
You always go, oh, I'm gonna make sure the last kiss I ever had with someone is like really beautiful and passionate. But if you don't know it's your last fucking gig, I mean, yeah, it's tough fucking break. But yeah, how are you coping like well without it? I mean, like, I don't actually want this to be the focus of it. Fuck this. Like, me and you have discussed this a little bit. We all have the same emphatic reasons for lockdown. Yeah. We're like, yeah, it's shit, mate. Like the world's in crisis. Like, but let's talk about I was going to say happier things, which is not entirely accurate. Let's talk about like, let's talk about poetry. And your poetry. Um, if you feel up for it, imagine, if you will, just for a
Yeah.
moment. I don't
Uh-huh.
I don't care for poetry. I'm one of those people that goes,
Yeah.
don't really like Carol Ann Duffy, did it in the AQA, don't understand it. Um, and you are trying to pitch me this collection, this
Okay.
wonderful 5,000 hertz, um,
Yeah.
and sell it to me. What would your go-to thing be? How do you sum that up?
It's a collection of experimental, effectively like verse work. It's almost like, yeah, collections of sounds and images exploring the nature of like pain and hurt and how we hurt each other, often without even knowing it. And I deliberately made the choice to step away from like the traditional poetic metaphors of wounds and separation and all of these things, and instead focus on something that made a lot more sense to me in terms of harm, and that was, funny enough, tinnitus. Like, your ears don't give a fuck whether, oh, I just realized, can we swear? Can we swear on this? Is
Sure,
swearing
like
okay?
if you assume what is it, the watershed mark, people just have
Yeah.
to watch it after 9, and it's fine. If they watch it before then, that's on them. I wasn't planning on marketing this to kids anyway, so you're good to crack on.
I was just like, yeah, like your ears don't give a fuck whether you the loud sound that you heard was a bomb going off or the last ever like Black Flag gig, the greatest debut at CBGB's, or a car crash. Like, regardless, absolutely regardless, your auditory nerves and the centers in your brain and your ears will react to sound above a certain level by being harmed.
Yeah,
And I found that was far more interesting in terms of playing with the idea of harm and taking deliberateness out of it, because we're very focused on intention, and very focused on intention when it comes to harm. And I don't think it quite works that way. There's this thing of, if I'm having a fireworks display to celebrate my birthday and those fireworks accidentally set fire to your house, it doesn't make your house less on fire if I go, but we were having a birthday party. Like,
it's a
I didn't
birthday
intend.
party. That's okay, right? Yeah, yeah.
It's a celebration. I intended to celebrate. I didn't intend to set your house on fire. Your house is still on fire. Like, it's beholden to me to do something about that, regardless of whether I intended the consequence. And I think there's something in the traditional kind of imagery and symbology of harm and hurt that kind of sidesteps a lot of that and assumes that any hurt experience, any pain felt, either is this kind of cosmic fatalistic, it was unavoidable, the spear of Longinus wound or Achilles heel sort of thing. It was just destined to just be this tragedy,
Yeah.
or it was a wound inflicted upon you by somebody willfully causing you harm. And actually, like, the vast majority of people get hurt in that gray area in between. And I wanted to kind of play with that and write poems that were a little bit gray and were a little bit in between. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons like I wanted to talk to you, especially because like being on the other end, excuse me, being on the other end of this book, I get like so much difference from what you put into it. But what was when you said that, I was like going through poems in my head and going, aha, okay. Like it just fucking it works, and like because you've constructed this in such a phenomenal way. Like I hope you can forgive me for this. I do this to every poet that I like, but I have been writing margin notes and folding
Oh no,
pages.
I encourage it.
Good.
Absolutely encourage it. Deface my book if you want. Like, rip the pages out and reorder the poems. Like, I am very much in the whole thing of like, enjoy a piece of literature to destruction. Like, I don't find being precious of the printed word in and of itself is sacrosanct. I do genuinely believe that books are beautiful things and should be treasured, but they should be treasured and they should be utilized. There's nothing more like there is. I came up in the Baptist church, right? I'm not a church goer anymore, but I came up in the Baptist church, and there were two types of people when it came to the Bible. There were the types of people who came with their kind of expensive leather zip cases and they're kind of like pristine, like it was like wafer thin paper, and like they, you know, this and gold edges, and that was the Bible that they brought to church, right? So you'd
Yeah.
be sat there in Bible study, and somebody would have something that looked like it cost it's some serious money, like it
Right.
looked good, and there are people next to them where it's like they flip it open and it's like the cover's falling off and it's been redone with duct tape, and they've underlined certain sections and there's highlighting, and they've written their own scribbles in the notes, and they've got post-it notes and all sorts of stuff, because they're actually engaging with the text.
Right. Right.
They're actually kind of living and trying to kind of understand it and going, oh, they're writing little asterisks. Oh, that's like when I experienced this thing, and does this mean this? Or questions to ask the pastor, and like I used to really vibe with that. Because I was thinking, you know what, I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna go through the complete works of Shakespeare and break that down in exactly the same way. If I'm gonna understand something, I'm gonna understand it. So why would I not do this to a text that like I'm actually supposed to be thinking is like the core, one of the core components of my life? I'm like, no, do not touch, do not engage. And so yeah, and it kind of comes from that. And if I thought, well, if people can do that and vibe with doing that to the Bible, and that actually engages their experience, because as well, you know, again, back in the day before my perspective on a lot,
Oh no. It appears to have.
they were
There you go.
like more weirdly moderate about it. Like there was this strange thing where I that fell out with the church because of asking questions, but the people I didn't fall out with were the people because they're the ones that were like, well, we actually do, we pull apart this text, and I learned that in the translation it actually meant something slightly different, or
Yeah.
were less set in stone because they'd had that. I was like, yeah, this is the way that I do things. So I often end up, it's expensive habit though, because I buy 2 of everything. If I really love something, I'll buy 2 or 3 of something, because I'll have the one that's on my shelf that looks
Yep.
good, that's nice, and I'm like, I will sit and I'll read this. But then I'm Jorge Luis Borges books. I think I have 4 editions of fictions, because I need to understand how he does what he does. I need
Yeah.
to. And the only way you can do that is by going down to like the level of the sentence. I'm like, why did he choose to put those words in that way? What's the function of them? Is this a mirror to a different point of this text? And it ends up looking like you're trying to you end up looking like a QAnon conspiracist, because you just got highlighted like links, like, did he mean this when he meant this? Yeah, no, I'm for it. So destroy the book. Go for it.
I haven't destroyed it. 'Cause I've only got the one copy, but it's just like, yeah, that's exactly how. And what was really nice is I read it in kind of sitting. I think yours took like, yours is a book that I didn't want to just go, I'm gonna fucking consume it. Like I think it is one that deserves like a savor. And I remember savoring it, and like this kind of this kind of shows how long it was since I first said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this book, because I remember being able to sit in a park in the sun and finish it.
Oh, do you remember outside?
Oh, the graphics were great.
They were great.
But that's like, I think that's kind of why I said you're the technical death metal of the poetic form, just because so much like what you've just described in terms of how you appreciate a book, you can absolutely see that in this, like how you've constructed it, and not just like the individual poems of like creating. I was going to say creating good poems is easy. I'm like, no, it's fucking not. But like, as well as the construction of the poems themselves, which are experimental, interesting, I think they work on any number of levels, which is why I said, like, how would you pitch this if you didn't like poetry? Because if I was picking up a poetry book and it was lines and lines and lines, I'd be like, all right, cool, that is definitely poetry. But yours has like fucking circle poems, like the 4x4 poem, like all these different things where you've just gone, this is not only me going, I can fuck with form so much to play around with it. You've instilled a purpose in why you've done that, and it's just this thing that works on all these levels, like of any level of appreciation, and well fucking done is in short. But it's genuinely something that I've like I think the most kind of common annotations I've made just at the minute are in terms of like they're not, it's not like underlined, it's just got like little, I've kind of highlighted it there on the edge of the page, and like I've written
Yeah.
down here like the little notes. The little notes for me are about the construction, because how you formatted not formatted the poems, put the pamphlet together, put the collection
Yeah.
together, that in itself tells a story, and it kind of, it sets us up with the first poem, and it goes, this is the concept behind what I'm trying to achieve here. So you introduce the concept straight away, so people are like, okay, cool, so this is a poem I can relate to. It's
Yeah.
interesting, like laid out, and then it builds up and goes, here's the context in context of something else. Here's a different level of context, and it adds these layers and layers and layers and layers. Sorry, I'm fanboying ever so slightly.
No, I genuinely love it, and I really love the fact that like you mentioned that, like, because I really did think of this album like I remember joking with you fairly often, like I'll go like, oh, when you talk about poetry people and you're like, how do you explain? Well, I've like, this is like the EP, right? This is like the concept EP, and
Yeah.
I've got like a full album coming out with another label, and like we talk about publishers like labels, and like, because for me that concept of like constructing an album is as close to I could, like, that was my way in, that was my way of understanding. So I was like, cool, if I'm going to do a concept album about pain and about pain and about hurt, how would I structure that? And if the only instrument I've got is words on the page, I can do anything I want but with words on the page. In the same way, Get Cape Work Cape Fly will do anything he wants with his voice and a guitar, right?
Yep.
But he can do anything, and he can tackle anything with that. And we're like, cool, that's a constraint. I will just constrain myself to the voice of text on a page. But that's kind of beautiful, particularly because you realize that constraint isn't a constraint at all. Like, I can have any voice I want. I can have any voices I want. I can just fuck time. Time is irrelevant now. Like, the whole reason I came up with it, like I was playing with the idea of like the Ouroboros poem, or I call it the tragedy loop, mostly because they tend to be quite painful
Just for
moments.
context, looks like that, and it's a beautiful, just look. And you can read it all the way around, and there's top text here and there's bottom text here. I really should get a better camera to actually do these interviews, so I can show people. Alternatively, buy the book. Sorry, yeah, yeah, go
But
on.
like, I love the idea of like, what's the constraints of performance? So, and you genuinely have to sit there, and like I was sat there with a pen, I'm like, what are the constraints of performance? And you're like, okay, well, you've got to have a mic, and no, you don't actually. Well, you've got to have a voice. Okay, I break everything down to, is like, well, you've got to start somewhere, and eventually it's got to end, and it usually has to be about something. I was like, well, I don't really want to get rid of the idea of it being about something. There was entire generations of poetry that focused on poems that weren't really about anything, like pure imagism or pure sound work, and that's fine. That's great for them, but I don't want to go there. But like, it suddenly clicked that like I just overlooked the idea that a poem had to have a beginning, middle, and end.
Mm.
And how would you represent a form that was designed to be continuous and persistent? Like, it had never stopped and had never begun. It just was. And yeah, so the Ouroboros poem kind of came out of that, like constructing kind of sentence fragments in such a way that without punctuation, the words can kind of flow into each other to the point where you can read round and round on that circle, and the only memory that you have is where you arbitrarily chose to start. And after you've read it enough, you can't even remember that bit anymore because you're
Mm-hmm.
just in the poem. And that became perfect, like a perfect kind of, I don't know what it is when something's not like a visual metaphor or experiential metaphor for like moments of hurt, like being in that point of tragedy for what feels like forever. Like,
Yeah,
time dilates, it just expands. And the two that I've got in there, like, I think it's like rack and taupe.
it is. Sorry, like I've got, that's on my list of questions. Like, explore these. I'm really glad that we segued into this so wonderfully. So, I mean, one of the things that I kind of recognized about that I thought was incredible, building on what you said, is the fact that because you're starting where you as the reader intend to start, and generally you kind of go top of the page, switch it around and read it. But
Mm.
you follow it round because of the punctuation, the way it's set out. You follow it round and you keep going, and it's this really interesting mechanism which I've not
He
seen.
flows. There we go.
Sorry, my internet has just gone like every so often it'll go, "Ah!" which is understandable. It's the middle of a pandemic, and we're all feeling that a bit. But it starts kind of wherever you want it to, and what that does to the reader at least is like make you repeat it in your head. So it works on a level. It's a mechanism that works on a level that reinforces the means of the poem as itself. The mechanism itself demonstrates further the meaning of the poem, and it forces you to almost live that, which is mind blowing. Like, were
I
you
did,
aware of what you have done, sir? Are you aware of like,
um, to a degree, but there's one thing that like I don't think many people have noticed because only one person has talked to me about this. Like narratively, Rack and Taupe are the same narrative from two different perspectives, and that's why they're on opposite sides of the same page. So Rack is a woman effectively in imagine crawling from the wreckage of a car crash, if you can imagine, crawling from the wreckage of a crash, and whether that crash is physical or metaphorical is not really explained because it kind of doesn't matter because it just is. It's crawling, kind of staggering from a wreck, battleship Potemkin style, and that just moment of absolute transformation where you're absolutely outside yourself, and all there is that moment and the fight and flight to get away. And the other side is the driver of the car that hit her. Where he's going around his circular justification for being in the pub for too long, and the decisions in his head for not signaling and then making the turn, and those exist in the same. It's almost like they exist in the same moment, like that moment of tragedy, that moment of impact. That's almost like capturing those thoughts in amber.
yeah,
And yeah, that was pretty harrowing actually, because a lot of my poems tend to kind of, this is going to sound so like art wanky, but like
we're
a
too
lot of
poetic. It happens.
a lot of my work starts as borderline intrusive thoughts going on daydreams. The ideas of like you just there was something kind of like unresolved. Like I can't remember who it was. Like I think it's like some line from Amadeus to like where Mozart's like, he's poked and poked about what makes him so special, and it's this thing of him being a completionist where like he just hears these melodies, these phrases in his head, but they're always unresolved. So
Mm,
he's forced to go to the piano and resolve these phrases just to get them to shut up. And that
yeah,
means he's constantly prolific. And it sometimes feels like that within the poem. Like, unless you find a way to catch that moment, and that it's not really a moment because it's very often it's just like a sentiment or like there's like one of the last poems in the book, like Drank, that just came from like a really idle conversation about like whether people who were the first people to do things actually knew what they were doing.
yeah.
Like who was the first person, that brave and fortunate soul who was just like, yeah, you know that thing that looks like snot inside a shell at the seaside, but that's delicious. Like, or like looked at a cow and thought, looked at a cow.
We're not on this channel to king shame. We can admit that, like maybe like how at 5,000 years ago when farming was just what 5,000, 10,000 years ago when farming was starting. I was just going, guys, don't know if you know, like it was a different time, man. Like
It was a different time.
I'm not sure if I can. That, but that like kind of that element of that element of kind of constructing a poem and being like haunted by it is, I think, is really interesting in itself, and it's something a lot of writers get. Like, what's his face, the guy who wrote American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis,
Yeah.
said like, I can't get rid of Patrick Bateman, and like if you read his novels, he appears in like every novel and it's really weird. That's kind of just one concept, but
Mm.
looking outside of it to see those ideas grow, which is it's not really the greatest segue, but never mind. It was where we were kind of going already. Is like you've discussed how poems form for you and how
Yeah.
you then force them on. I say force them onto the page. I imagine it's like
Sometimes it is forcing.
yeah, I was gonna
Sometimes,
say it's a mixture. Like sometimes it's juicing them onto the page. Sometimes you just
mm.
open your mouth or just pick up your pen and a poem falls down. Sometimes it's like get down on that page, goddamn you. But like, where did poetry come from for you? Like, what was your this is like a real generic question. It's not in relation to the book, but just
No,
first
that's
things
fine.
first.
It's one that I haven't thought about for a while, actually, but it was one that I've been thinking about recently. Um, I started writing poetry, particularly poetry, when I was a teenager. Um, so I have we've talked about this before, but I have a neurological condition which is basically hemiplegia. So it screws up the kind of sensation and kind of dexterity on the left side of my body.
Hmm.
So I often use a cane, and it usually manifests in horrendous headaches and static in your nerves and all sorts of really very unpleasant neurological side effects that I'm managing very, very well at the moment. But I was not managing very, very well when it came on as a teenager, because I went from, you know, doing sports, being like a track and field athlete, young track and field athlete, and playing rugby and just being, yeah, that guy, to very, very quickly being like, okay, cool. So I'm in a wheelchair now.
Holy
And I
shit!
might not ever not be in a wheelchair. And this is something I need to get my head around. And thankfully, it did improve. It did improve massively, and kind of have relapsing spells, which is not great, particularly in the age that we're living at the moment. Ironically, one of the things that got me through COVID is my really shit immune system. So it turns out that was the one thing that was actually a really good thing about having a crap immune system, is it was just like, yeah, so it turns out that COVID can't turn your immune system against you like it's doing to a lot of people who are ending up in hospital. So you might be able to get through this with just like a lot of bed rest and being careful. And I
Holy
was like,
shit!
so yeah, that's another story. But yeah, so I started writing as almost like a way to kind of reinvent myself, and well, literally rebuild myself, because you don't think, like, at 15 you don't think about anything. You don't have, like, you think you do. You think you're really deep when you're like, I feel things sometimes, but you actually don't consider anything outside of yourself very often, like, apart from what's for tea, and oh, she looks nice, or in my case, she looks nice, or they look nice. But and like, it was just this. I had to do something to articulate the thoughts that were in my head, because I couldn't physically do anything about them. A lot of teenagers who are going through like really emotionally distressful times, at the very least, have their body. They
Yeah.
can lash out. Like, I had nothing to I couldn't like, I threw something across my room at one point. I really vividly remember this, because of just how, like, when you hit bottom. It's like I threw something across my room, and my room is not designed very well for my chair, so I could get out of my bed and I could get into the chair, and I hadn't been doing the physio, because you were supposed to do the physio, and of course I don't do what I'm told. You can't tell me what to do, even if it's for my own personal health. And so I got angry, and I threw something across the room, and my head, it was like, I'm gonna throw this across the room and I'll be like, ah, and it will smash. What happened is my arms were too weak from atrophy, so I threw this thing across the room. It didn't actually get across the room. It didn't break. It landed on the floor. I overextended myself and fell sideways in my chair. So now I'm on the floor, and I didn't even break the thing. And I'm just like, there's got to be a better way. Like, it's like, I'm done now.
If
Listen,
your efforts of
listen.
self-destruction are missing, then yeah, fuck, man. That's
So I was like, okay. So yeah, I started writing. I've always been a huge reader, but there was something about the way that poetry is approached in education where you can be an absolutely avid reader, but there is this wall there where you're like, oh, poetry and literature is that thing that you read. It's not that thing that you can do. So I'm sat there reading Bukowski's Bluebird, and it just triggers me like, why the fuck can't I do this?
Mm.
Like, he gets to say how he feels exactly how the way he feels. Exactly. Right? He doesn't have to mince words. He doesn't have to fit to a rhyme scheme. He doesn't have to find a pentameter or write an essay explaining it afterwards. He just writes how he feels. Why can't I do that? And that's what I started doing. And it was terrible and it was crap and it was probably ham-fisted and it probably helped by the fact, you know, and I was probably massively helped in my career by the fact like the first 3 or 4 years of my writing was shared by absolutely no one because I couldn't share it with anyone. Like,
Mm.
I didn't know any poetry nights. Like I didn't have friends who were out doing things. Even when I was able to kind of go out and about and do stuff, like I wasn't part of that crowd. I think I rocked up to my first proper poetry night maybe when I was 18. Um, so I'd been like scribbling away notebooks for like 3 years with nothing really else to do.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was Howl actually. Howl. Yes, I remember it being Howl because it used to be upstairs in the Dark Horse, and I remember paying £3 on the door and then kind of going through and then expecting a room and then having these stairs, and I'm there with my cane, which should have been calipers, but I really didn't want to use calipers because I felt really self-conscious about them. So I'm there
Yeah.
just with this cane. I'm like, I'm not going to get up those stairs. And I was like, you've paid fucking £3. You're getting up those stairs. Because otherwise you're just going to get a bus and you have to go home. So I went up the stairs and it was amazing. It was amazing. It was the first time I'd ever seen Leon perform. And if you've ever seen Leon Bushnell perform, it's kind of like a hug and a hand grenade combined together in like an experience. And yeah, yeah, it was a
Yeah.
vibe.
Yeah, that man is like a street preacher that you just can't like you can't the guy is a hug and a hand grenade, in fact, I think like puts it exactly right. That was is funnily enough, like Hal was like the first night outside, not outside of Bristol entirely, but definitely the first night in Birmingham I came to, just because I heard so many people go on about it. And I think that's where we met, in fact, like because
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was because I came to one in like the middle of winter, and no one was there, so there was like space on the open mic. So I was like, thank fuck. And then I think the next one, where I was doing a slot, that was where we met. I think
Yeah.
I may have been misremembering this because this was
I
a while
still
ago.
remember lines from the poems you performed.
Oh, this is
I
this
won't.
is your night. This is your night. We'll do another one later, like when all about me. But no, this is like with that first howl. Did you get up and do a poem there? Or was this like your
Oh
first?
god, no.
Yeah,
Oh god, no. I was way, 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 way too terrified to do that. It wasn't years. It was years of kind of going to Howl on and off and kind of trying out the other smaller nights as well. There's one that's been running for about 7 years. Oh gosh, no, longer than that now. Because I remember going to the 7-year anniversary. So yeah, it's been longer than that now. Called Poetry Jam. It's run by the Beat Freaks, and it's not everybody's vibe, and it is very, very, very raw, and it's almost like it's just the idea. It's pure open mic, no headliners. But it is that place where you go to kind of drop forward yourself. I think there's one thing that he teaches you incredibly well is like mic control, which the running joke is that you get poets, they're amazing poets who just don't know how to play an audience or deal with a mic or just the things that make performance. And it's
yeah,
like that poem syntactically on the page, in the words that scrolled past my eyes as you were performing were phenomenal, but like no one's helped give you the guidance to kind of carry them through. And Poetry Jam very often, bless them, it was kind of the opposite of that. It was like exceptional performance and like, yeah, okay, that was a little, maybe that could have been workshopped a little bit more. But the fact is, it was just a vibe because it was raw and it was there and it was
yeah,
true and it was
yeah.
honest and it felt good. And a lot of those poets went on to be phenomenal poets. Once they'd learned how to hold a mic and hold a room, like
And that's the
that's when it
thing.
began.
That's the thing with an open mic, isn't it? Like I think you get to a certain stage where, like, I still haven't got it. I like my cynicism meter for some reason with open mics never drops. Like, but I know a lot of people who've been in the scene the same amount of time as me, kind of
Yeah.
same level of me, go fucking open mics. There's a lot of like not not polished stuff
Yeah.
to be generous. But like an open mic, there's something about an open mic. Like I cut my teeth. We had very much the same in Bristol. The Arts House open mic every Friday night from like 8:30 till like past midnight when they were like going, "We're fucking closing, please get out." And it's just everything goes. But it teaches you how to understand how a crowd's reacting to you, because
Yeah.
certainly I know Beat Freaks has kind of got a much friendlier vibe, but people were still, even if they're not being like openly going, "This is a bit shit," there's still gonna be really visual cues of what you're getting. And like with the open
Yeah.
mic, correct me if you feel differently, but the open mic is a central place for people to
Yeah.
try out stuff, like just try out techniques, because stuff that works on the page needs a different delivery. I know, and I hate this page versus stage debate. I think it's nonsense. I appreciate it's got some good use, but I know some amazing performers who cannot write who don't work on the page, and some incredible page performers who just get up and read, and they just read, and it's that, and it's like, your poem is so wonderful, give it the love it deserves, go to an open mic and try it. And it's like, you're both fucking poets. Find each
Yeah.
other, talk to each other, and like do workshops. But the open mic is a thing for that. Like, and Birmingham's a hell of a scene. Like, some of the names you've got coming out there is just rude. Every time I've gone up for any event, I'm just going like, "Oh, cool, your open micers are like better than like the people who we're booking for." Like, it's how dare you? But like, tell me about the
We do
scene.
have a really beautiful scene. We do have a beautiful scene, and I love it. I love it very, very, very much. And it 2020 did break my heart a little bit when it was this kind of settling into the idea that like, oh, it might not be a thing again. But we are working behind the scenes, and we're kind of trying to pull as many strings and poke as many, you know, money trees and things as we can to try and kind of keep the vibe alive. And we're all connecting. Like poetry WhatsApps are never gonna die. Like, poetry WhatsApps and Twitter group messages are just never gonna die. Like we're always constantly in communication with each other, because you kind of have to be. I do really seriously feel for like there's a generation of first years now that will not have experienced like rocking up to the Grizzly Pear
Yeah,
or Words, which is round the corner from BCU, which is the night we used to run, and just dropping in and just getting the socks blown off by amazing poets. And like there was nothing that made me more happy than seeing like just a new young face just that rock up to a night, and like they're just there with a notebook and like a glass of whatever's red, and or a coffee or just whatever, and just like scribbling away, and they're just like, That's just it." And they're just absolutely absorbed in it, and just been like, okay, because a lot of people used to come and like almost like the first time, even before they'd really sat down, they'd be like, "Well, what's your open mic?" And we were like, "Oh, we're not an open mic. This night is not an open mic. There are nights in Birmingham, plenty of them are open mic. This is feature sets only. 6 poets, 10 minutes each, here for an hour. We have no idea what they're gonna do. It's experimental as fuck. This could be
oh
awesome." So yeah, the one that when we're back in space and we can meet in meet space again, I want you up to be on Words, because it's absolutely your vibe. The one rule is there are 2 rules. You get 10 minutes, you can do whatever the fuck you like in those 10 minutes, and the first poem has to be a cover poem, so it has to be a poem by somebody else. Yeah, so any cover poem, as long as it's not your own. So we've had, you know, Ted Hughes opening, we've had oh god, we've had Rilke a couple of times, which was kind of beautiful actually.
yeah, I bet.
Yeah, so you just get the chance to just really kind of vibe with, and like they talking about why you do what you do and why you want to do what you do or what you're trying.
Mm.
Because a lot of this stuff, I'm like, try something that's a work in progress. You literally sat in a room full of like 50 poets. If there's any time you're gonna get feedback on stuff that's like technical or weird, or like I'm
Yeah.
trying to do this thing with vowels, yeah, we'll get that. We'll be able to tell you whether it's working or not.
Tell you what, you should get. I reckon Tonic would be. it's not, it doesn't sound the same at all. Like it's a very different structure, but like the similar, it welcomes experimentation. Basically, you go there and the audience member write prompts. They get put on postcards and like now it's put up online, and you select a prompt, and then you have a month to write something based on that prompt. So it's a scratch piece,
Oh, yeah.
and then so you have six poets doing like a 5 minute slot with this new piece that they made, and then there's a Q&A session. So like
Oh,
it's for the audience to go, you saw the rain was pissing down on you and you somehow turned it into the happiest poem in the world, or you turned it into a song, or we did this, and it just like, it really welcomes that kind of that vibe of it. So yeah, I will link you up with some links afterwards, but yeah, the Birmingham scene is phenomenal, and it's full of wonderful characters, incredibly varied voices. Like I think you have just escaped, I think this is probably because I don't have as much immersion in it as you do, but you have escaped, in my mind at least, poetry voice. Certain like
yes.
you know when you hear like there's like a cadre of London poets, there's a cadre of
Yeah,
Bristol
yeah,
poets,
yeah.
there's Bath Uni poets, there's Manchester poets, Yorkshire poets, but Birmingham has avoided that somehow. I'm sure there is something where if you sat there you'd be able to go, oh, that's interesting. But like I don't know where I'm going with that. I just find it interesting.
I think with Brum, for a start, I've funny enough, because I've moved around so much, my uh in Birmingham, my accent, that's a brilliant Freudian. My accent isn't as pinned to a place. So
Mm,
like my Brummie accent, I can dial up and down really, really easily. And so it depends entirely what I'm talking to. But most people can't. So you end up with, even if you've come from halfway across the world to come to university here, or you've come to work here, or you've come to just live here because it's a city that people just want to come to live in. It's just a dope city. Like you're surrounded by people who really do talk like they've got this really thick Brummie accent most of the time, and like it's very, very difficult to kind of not, like, you're kind of fighting that inflection
yeah,
consistently. So, and particularly because a lot of the poets as well tend to write. In fact, there's one poet who I think might be. So we've come to the conclusion that if it's ever proven that she's not human, she's actually the incarnate voice of Birmingham in the Black Country, and that's Liz Berry.
oh fuck yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, I love how it's just really random. Like I'm talking about like MK Jasmine, the city we became. Like you are the embodiment. You are the single sentient embodiment of this entire area, just wrapped up into one soul.
I mean,
Liz
her
Berry.
written work like is so fucking interesting in that it absolutely makes it. You also read Liz Berry as well as Adrian, but like yeah, Liz Berry,
Yeah.
the line breaks.
We
Like
could
I,
literally geek out for hours just to like breaking down the Republic of Motherhood and just be like, what? Why? Just why?
I mean,
It's good. It's good.
this is going a little bit into poetry nerd territory, which are trying to make this both interesting for poetry nerds like ourselves and interesting for people who've never heard of it. But Liz Berry is, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point because like the Birmingham accent like is like I guess the like that kind of area, extending it further to further up the Midlands and everything
Mm.
is really wonderful. It's such an interesting brogue to hear like poetry in, and how to make that work in the way that people do in such varied ways is fucking incredible. I was talking about like poetry performance style, I guess, rather
Oh
than
yeah, no,
content.
but that's the thing.
Yeah.
I personally think that that poetry voice, that performance style, that ability to settle into a kind of mode, like the reason it doesn't exist so much in our scene is probably because you've got that everybody's coming
Mm,
to this central point of gravity that's really strong, which is the good old Birmingham Yam accent, which inflects nearly everything if you've been here for long enough. And by saying being here long enough, it's very, very entertaining hearing like international students who had not a hint of it after like 2 years of living in it. Also, just like, you're brummier than me. This is brilliant, Bab. Love it. And like, because there is that point of inflection where it's actually considered a language, like it's
yeah.
actually considered a linguistic divergence, right? So London poetry voice is not considered a, like, the London accent isn't considered an accent.
Yeah.
If you had a unless you were an incredibly strong Cockney accent, right? Most accents from the South, unless they're like very, very, very strong, you could go anywhere else in the world and they'd be like, oh, that person's an English person. The being from Birmingham is one of the few places that I've been to where I've literally gone to other countries and they're like, "Are you Canadian? Like where are you from? Are you from Scotland? Like where? I don't."
Yeah.
It's strange, but maybe that's just my weird kind of pet theory. Because
No, it's really interesting pet theory to have. I mean, I was wondering if like it goes into the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, like if it's actually like a different almost a different language, and therefore there is a different mindset within Birmingham because it's one of those ones. I mean, I think we joked about kind of certainly I've spoken with Jasmine Gardosi about it, where there was the Birmingham Bristol poetry exchange for a little while going back and forth, where we'd be like, we're going to send you some poets, you can send us some poets. And I think like our cities are very, very alike in a lot of ways in poetry scenes. And like,
you're basically Birmingham on Sea.
so like, Nafisa Hamid, like we're like really good friend of mine. Like she comes down into poetry events before all this was over, and I found it so strange because I would go to work and she'd just bum around the house and like, oh, by the way, I'm going down to Weston, which is where the sea is. And like, I've lived in Bristol for 17 years, 16 years. Why would you go to Weston? And she's like, it's the nearest sea to us. And I'm like, oh God, okay. Now I just don't question it. Like, I get it. It's like, yeah, but I will take Birmingham on Sea. All I'm asking is that they kind of go right, Birmingham, Bristol, and come around, and then Welsh independence with all of us. We'll go with them.
It's like Welsh independence. We can just carve off the Midlands as well. Just like Coventry gets a referendum. Everybody else will just go.
The northern. This is off topic, but the Northern Unity Party is building fucking steam. The Welsh, like yes, Simmer's buildings. It's ridiculous, and I love it. I'm here for the dissolution of this terrible, terrible country that we live in. What? Sorry. What horrible place to live. I'm just gonna move on from there. I just do also have to say as well, like I've written these questions down. In terms of your poetry, there's the line in "We'll Bury Our Father," which is "We are acolytes of the broken home," and the whole stanza then from "There's a man going around talking names, but we're keeping ours." I mean, like I've kind of singled out a lot of lines and gone like Topin Rack, which we already spoke about. In terms of this book, Returning to 5,000 Hertz.
Yeah.
Really difficult question, and this is, or maybe not a really difficult question, but as a book, and like there's this theory going, not theory, kind of common consensus going around that you don't finish poems, you abandon them. Is this an abandoned book? Do you feel like this because you're constant? And this isn't to. I'm trying really hard not to go. Oh, I'm a much better writer now than I was a year or two ago when I wrote this, but also acknowledge like that strange kind of existence where we live in that you end up hating a lot of your work. You end up dissatisfied with certain parts. With that, is this something that you ever wanted to make, like a point and click adventure game, like a musical, like a one person show of it, or are you going? This is a brilliant piece of work. I am content with it. I am moving on to the next thing in my life now, and that's that. Or is that big question? Many answers. Sorry,
Big question, many answers. That's a really good question. If I had to be completely honest about it, I'd say no. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with because the way I think about poems is a little bit weird. And I've had the way I say when it's a little bit weird is like I'm quite mechanistic when it comes to a poem. Like I will often struggle to put a poem down, not because I don't have the words or I don't have the images, but for me, the form and structure, the presence, the being of a poem has to serve the function of the poem.
Yeah.
And sometimes like either I can't feel the form, or in the case of Typo Racken, didn't exist. So I had to kind of like figure out what the fuck am I supposed to do. Like I had to build something that would fit the ideas and the taste of what I wanted into it. And So often when I've done that, what I've done is I've created an iteration which is like the best conceivable iteration of that thing that I can figure out how to do at that time.
Yeah.
And so in a way I have to abandon it because I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of like checking with again, like we watched like all of the Marvel movies during lockdown because what else are you gonna do? Um and so we were like, we'll watch them in like narrative order.
Right.
And the thing that I found really interesting is that like there are loads of sublines, like sub narratives, are actually really beautiful, really interesting narratives. Like, you know, Banner coming to terms with the Hulk, and like as a symbolism of
Mhm.
like masculine kind of like aggression mixed with kind of like intelligence and fragility, and finding that balance between, and like the idea that like without any kind of like real discussion about it, like by the end of the films, he's just like Banner intelligence, like wearing clothes and stuff, but just walking around in Hulk's body.
Yeah, yeah.
Like somebody like is aggressive to him, and he's just like, "I really like it if you could take your hands off me." This is a person who could like deadlift a tank, and he's just like, "No, I'd like it if you could take your hand off me." And I was just like, "That is it. That is whatever that is. That is the
Love it.
message." And
Yeah,
it's not even
yes. Yeah, yeah.
it's not even the core kind of like thing, or like Iron Man suits, where he starts with this kind of thing where he's like the best technology he's got, and it iterates and iterates and iterates, and it becomes this thing where like the iteration almost kills him at one point.
Mm.
Literally everyone at one point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Spoilers, some spoilers.
It's been
But
out
like
for
you
like
know,
15 years. We're like, I don't, yeah, sorry.
people have had time. It's like spoiling The Great Gatsby. Come on. But like you know, it gets to the end, and it's like the suit is kind of an irrelevant concept now because it's like nanotechnology or whatever. It can just like flow over him and like become anything he wants, and it's got lasers and it can grow wings. Like it's almost irrelevant that he's wearing a suit. It's just him. It's
Yeah.
just a conceptual extension of him. And this is going to be a very tortured metaphor, but that's very much how I see poetics. That's how I see poetics functioning, right? So I have something I wish to express. Sometimes that expression can be really, really specific, but it's usually multifaceted, right? Like
Yeah.
the taste or the temporality of something, the kind of the compression of something, the density of something, the kind of cacophony or the volume of something, stuff that's really, really difficult, even with like how much language we have to play with, right? We have words for nearly everything. Not as many words as the Germans. German is still a superior language. Compound words rock. Like we have words for everything. Um, but like we still struggle, and that's why poets are necessary. That's why poeticism and poetics are necessary. It's like, how do we construct with these words that we have things that are more than just the images described, right?
Mm.
So like um da, 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 da. In the event of fire, which was one of my favorite ones to perform, because if I get a chance and I'm up first, I will just bullshit that like they haven't done the fire safety briefing in the room. And usually we're in like the back room of a pub somewhere or like something in a theater, and nobody actually has done the fire safety briefing. So I'm just like, I know I'm at first, and I'll just like, these are the exits, and I'll give them the accurate information, and then just start segueing, and then it becomes, you know, do not stop, do not drop, do not roll, do not question the ephemeral, capricious nature of flame. And it gets weird and weirder and weirder. And like, but like, it never stops being a fire safety briefing. And you don't change your register, you don't change
Yeah.
the meter. And like, so constructing it that way means that there is no, like, it's very weird not having the indicator that you're supposed to, like, I don't know, the click line, the drop line, the pull away, all of these things removed from the performance that kind of
Mm.
become indicative to poetry voice. This is the point where I get louder. This is the point where I am barreling through a list. This is the point where I'm putting emphasis on the wrong parts of this, so you draw attention to the. Do you know what I mean? I've deconstructed the shit out of all of that, and so I know kind of how it feels and what it does. So to actively go, I'm going to try and do all of the above effects with none of the ingredients. I will set myself the thing of making a 3-tier birthday cake out of nothing but fresh fruit. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that's more fun to me. That's more interesting to me. And once I figured out how to do it, I'm like, dope. This is it now. Cool. So I've got ones that sound like, that feel like, it should be the word because I don't perform them anymore. But train announcements, and they're structured exactly the same way. And I'm sat there at New Street, Grand Central, listening to train announcements, listening to where the pauses lie and how they're delivered, and the strange, like imagining the weird bit where the computer's thinking of how to, pronounce Penzance. Oh, that's a line break there, and like, and I fall in love with that weird bits of language that we stop paying attention to because they're so useful.
Yeah.
Like they mean a thing and they make you feel a certain way, and instead of just poking at the bits of rhetoric we know and we understand,
It's like a meme in itself. It kind of not in the cartoon sense, but in
no, I love meme. As in like
yeah,
mimetic theory. I have,
yeah.
we can geek out.
It's like an instant way. It's a like switch that whether or not you're aware of it as a listener, as a reader, you kind of it does that thing of clicks the mechanism in your head that makes you think in this certain way.
Yeah.
Which, depending on where your poem goes, you either subvert that expectation or you embed it further and look at how weird it is that we've just become so used to like green meaning white man running into a green thing being a fire exit. Like, you're like, oh shit, okay. Or like I've heard, I think the kind of easiest example of that is, I think there was a poet who's done greyhound racing, and you know how like horse racing, greyhound racing, like the commentary there, he does it as a commentary going, and it's nearly head, isn't it, coming in, and he's not going to get it out by alive, he's not going to get out alive, he's nearly there, third wife down, all this kind of stuff, like building up and building up. And it's like, that's like a really basic kind of way of doing it, but it's super effective because he's taken this mode of speech that we understand, that is kind of just embedded in us, that we, whether or not we know it, and gone, and here's a poem. And like the way that language works, the way those things work, and you are excuse me, as I've said, someone who gets that, like, and this is just running through your work. It's always so interesting to kind of see that. And this video is largely just in us nerding out. This is something that definitely need to buy. If you're watching this and you haven't got it, give it a read. Give it like a one read, because there are bits in it that will make you fucking cry. I remember sitting on a bench and just going, like, that, and like, this is poetry crack cocaine. We know when our poems really hit, and we're just like, yeah, tell me how much. But genuinely, like, just reading, I finished the book. I was just like, I was going to meet a couple of mates. I think this was like when we were allowed 6 people in a park, so it was a big experience. I was just dragging my feet because I knew I had this book in my bag, and I sat on a bench in the sun, and I was like, fuck. And I just, like, I think I messaged you straight after, because this is the thing, I feel bad for admitting this. I didn't get this when it came out. It was only after I saw you read at the PBLJ 3 or 4 launch. Yeah. I was like, shit, why haven't I got his book yet? But
that's fine.
That's one of those things. I'm really glad I did. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask you a couple more questions. Sure. And then we'll close this off, because like, this has been great fun. I've loved every second of this. It's been really nice talking to you again after so long. But I'm also conscious of people's like patience, and if they're just going, why isn't Sam naked on the internet? This is weird. This wasn't what I signed up for. When I actually came up with the idea for this, like to have a chat with you, I did put out a shout to any of my mates, and obviously my mates, as we discussed in the beginning, are kind of music orientated in the most part. I've got a lot of poetry friends and stuff, but one of the questions that came out was from Screamo fan 666, and he just wanted to know how you impart meaning. And I told him that I would ask you this. It's a very open question, saying, how do you impart meaning? But the questioner himself is a singer in a metal band, a punk band, and he comes from a very when he's writing, his lyrics are a very stream of consciousness approach, and he's combining very literal with very metaphoric concepts. A really interesting way to do it. I think he's looking to kind of marry them together a bit more fluidly, and ask, how do you achieve that in your writing?
Ooh, I don't know. I could take serious notes. There were some bands we've discussed Cult Leader before. And I feel as a poet, I can take notes from particularly Converge and Cult Leader in terms of succinctly and just lines that aren't even like, as in like you just reading. You're just reading text, not even listening to the song, and just the impact in 3
Mhm.
words sequenced together, and you're just like, yes, that is correct. Like the no notes, that is correct. Um, and then layering on all the layers, and it's just like when you're starting, it's almost like the thing of it's almost like almost like an overkill. Sometimes like when you start with ammunition that dense, then you're going to add sonics on top of it. Like, come on, give us a break. But I love it. But I would say if you're going to go with a limited palette, right, you've got a limited time, you've got limited syntactic variation, and like you can't go so dense with these syllables. You're not, I was going to say you're not Lamb of God, but like I would truncate your time. Truncate your time. If you're gonna focus on a moment, if you're gonna focus on a point of reflection, if you're gonna focus on a series of events or an event, I'd truncate that time. I'd break it down to a second, a snapshot, and then just dissect the shit out of it. If the entire verse is just, I really wish I remember the band, but it's a very 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 dark song, but it is a beautiful song, but it's about, um you learn through the process of the song that it's the good side of kind of like Nordic black
Yeah,
metal.
yeah, yeah.
um
I love the fact that there's a good side and bad side. That we have to go. I like black metal, but not National Socialist black metal. As if that's a. Oh shit! You've paused. This is the good stuff.
um
Sorry, there you are.
and it's about like one of the victims of the Utoya massacre, um which hit me hard and hit a lot of people hard. I've got friends across Europe, and I've got friends on the left across Europe, and the idea that it was like, oh, that's a thing that can happen,
Mm,
and they can do that now. That's the world we live in now, that can happen. But there's an entire verse which is just about how the grass changes color as you approach it in closeness, and you realize it's changing color in approachness because he's been hit and he's going down, so he's shrunken the entire that second into like an
mm,
entire verse of just talking about how the grass is getting greener, which have then, because of course, becomes a metaphor. And it's just like it's one of the most phenomenal verses just of anything I've read in a really really long time.
yeah,
And I was like, okay, this is an approach. This is how you do it. This is an approach. Um,
yeah. So you think
I,
like you can inform both work and inform like metal and poetry should go together is what
oh,
I'm hearing,
absolutely.
or they are there already. I mean, there's already a spoken word album with metal from Sir Christopher Lee, obviously. But it's yeah, it's one of those. Like I'm completely agreeing with you. Like I fucking love the lyrics of so much metal, like and so much varied like screamo and punk and hardcore that just like it's limited because there is that you have to deliver it in that syntax. You have to go. I'm going to say this until my breath runs out.
Yeah.
From experience in my very old days as in grindcore bands, like it's limited. You don't have much time to explore those concepts. So you have to find that efficient way. But I think
Yeah.
that's a really great answer for one of the fans out there. I'm just going to check if there's any other things that I haven't. Um, oh, another person asked, has a poem you wrote ever predicted the future? Which is a terrifying poet like question in the midst of the current pandemic. Because I have gone through my tweets and gone through, Sam, did you ever say what we need is a new plague or anything like this? Tell me you haven't like tweeted something ironically. Um, but
uh, um, okay, so there is a poem that has not found its way into a book yet, but it's a poem that I performed a few times, which was in a voice that I really loved, and I've loved so I've played around with it a few times. I ended up writing stories from this voice, and it's kind of an unnamed guy, but he's very much the kind of a Middle England kind of everything's all right voice, and I fell in love with it because I just love the idea of like a full-on storm boot fascist dictatorship happening with like the Nazis marching through Middlesbrough and then being like, yeah, we didn't have parades back in the day, though, did we? I mean, we got them now, so it's all right, I guess. Like, just like trying to kind of
Yeah.
like, however bad it gets, just trying to figure out a way. And like the fun of the poem was just like, I refused to be phased by anything.
Yeah.
Everything was just, it's going to be all right. 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 He pops up as a character. He has a name now. I can't remember what his name is off the top of it. I don't think it's actually mentioned in the story. His girlfriend / wife's name is mentioned in the story. There's a story called Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which is pretty dark actually. It's in the new book that's coming out from Broken Sleep, which is going to be my first full collection. And it's it's tentatively titled. Well, I say not tentatively titled. I have a really bad thing of like, oh, I changed my mind. It's we are always and forever ending, and the entire book is just about the concept of endings and whether they're even a thing, and what an ending is. Where does the ending start? Can things end? It's got a crown of sonnets, or a kind of a derivation of a crown of sonnets I've called the Hollow Crown, in the center of it, which is dedicated to 2020, because there is no way you can fit all of 2020's crap in one poem, so I had to do 15. And I fell in love with it because I was just like, I'm just going to do dumb sonnety things and just try and just really faff around with the form. And the Hollow Crown's cool because the Crown of Sonnets technically it's 15 sonnets. We've got seven. You've got seven seven sonnet, effectively like pairs, as it were, that are like the first, and each line. The rules are each line, the end line of your first sonnet is the first line of the second sonnet, and on and on and on and on and on and on. And the 15th sonnet, which is like your bonus sonnet, is actually the combined first lines of all the other 14 sonnets that make a sonnet of their own. So they're not quite at like.
So let me get this straight. You're writing in sonnets, which like are form poetry. A lot of people struggle with form, and then you're going,
Yeah.
this isn't difficult enough. And then you know what's really cool? Like that duplex idea by that Jericho Brown guy. Like that's really cool. You kind of echo the line. But what if you did it across 7 poems? Are you fucking mad? I am so hyped for that. That sounds fucking sick.
I'm really excited about it. I hope it works. I don't know. I would wish that I could be on like Jericho Brown and Tahimba Jess. Like if you can imagine like a pantheon, like Jericho Brown and Tahimba Jess are basically in the pantheon of gods.
Yeah,
They're there, like in the temple, carved in marble. It's brilliant. But yeah, I wish I would love to get to that level, particularly the syncopated sonnet. I tried so hard to get a syncopated sonnet into this new book. To Tahimba Jess is if you get Olio Tahimba Jess, it won the Pulitzer in like 2017.
yeah.
Has Jericho just won the Pulitzer now?
This year or last year, yeah.
Yeah, dope. So both of them have won a Pulitzer. Definitely deserve to be on the show. No, I look above, like they're not actually there. That would be.
That's it
really
with poets. Like you do, and I mean, I don't know if we kind of this we haven't discussed this. So this is like I was going to say, tell me about your next book as the last question, but I think actually looking at the people who you look up to is a really nice note to end on, because that's kind of us going like, and here's who we aspire to be. So like, talk me through some of the poets that fucking hit you in various ways, move you, shake you, seduce you, whatever it is they do. Like,
okay, I really want to take Sharon Olds out for a drink at some point. I got to shake hands with Terence Hayes, and I swore to God I would not fanboy out, and I fanboyed out so hard. So goddamn hard. It was like, even I was just like, that was a bit sad, dude. Like but you know what? No regrets, no ragrats. Um, yeah, Terrence Hayes I'm a huge fan of. Like I said, Tahimba Jess, Jerica Brown, absolutely. K Tempest is one of the finest individuals. Just, just stop. Just one of the finest individuals, but also one of the finest individuals putting words down in any form, in any way.
Mm,
I've never met someone before who was. I was like, oh, you breathe this. This is your
yeah.
being. This is like this isn't a like it's not a job or this is this is you all the time. You probably thinking you're thinking first. Okay, cool. I knew people like you existed. Like they write about them in books and stuff. I never thought I'd actually meet someone who's just their flow is just continuous. It's just phenomenal. Um, Gosh, a lot of a lot of dead poets as well. But weirdly, like I have this weird thing with dead poets, right? So like I love dead poets, but I don't like I love the dead poets that other people love, but I also love dead poets who are dead and no one's ever heard of them, and it really breaks my heart. Like I've got this book full of like blues poems from that were like written like in the 19 from between like the 1900s to like the 1930s, most of the deep south of America. And because the thing is as well, like blues was a poetic form before it was considered a musical form. Capitalism made it a musical form, right?
Oh shit.
um and so blues poems, the lyrics were like you could go away from a blues performance with a playbill which had the poem written on it. This is why a lot of these things were kind of catalogued, and some of these poems are just, yeah. Like we talk about, you know, your poem of "Stop the Clocks," and yes, and that definitely deals with grief. But hearing like just ways of articulating grief that just come from such a place, because it's like this is personal grief, but also we are living in a war zone of an apartheid state in the Louisiana South. And my wife's left me. Like it's just like it's this thing of like how do you get, and like that sardonic humor and the kind of the darkness of it, and
Mm,
like, you know, finish your drink and walk away because you're not dressed for dying today, like a sort of thing, like that kind of like ah like stuff that we then come back to like later on, and we're like, oh yeah, it's really cool that they're like. And I'm reading these guys from like guys, I'm actually far more women than men, um from like Ma Rainey. Ma Rainey is one of my favorite, hands down. Ma Rainey is one of my favorite poets, living or dead. She should be there with Audre Lorde, in my honest and humble opinion. She definitely didn't have the reading. She definitely didn't have the scope and the level of articulation, but she knew how to say exactly how she felt and
yeah.
how a lot of people around her felt. And like she was dangerous in the way that she could get people to concurrently get 200 people in a room to feel the same thing like that, with just this phraseology she was using. But
Yeah.
like that's what we aim for. Like we aim to get close to that, and the idea that you can do that with something that like you wrote on the back of a napkin before you went on stage, dope. So yeah, so I have well, I could wax lyrically for ages about poets I love, but those are some.
Thanks, man. I mean, that's a hell of a pantheon to look up to when you're like when you've got gods like that above you. You're gonna be struggling. They're not gonna come down on their off. But fuck. This is the thing. I absolutely know that we could definitely talk another hour. And
Yeah.
I'm just gonna wrap up for the purpose of the video and stop recording, and then I'll do my goodbyes and everything. But thank you so much for talking to me, Adrian. It's been a pleasure. This is your book, which do you have it? Like, I would say go to your website, but if you don't have any, we established
I mean,
that.
I can get some more, and I can send some out. So yeah, go to my website and get them from there.
Yeah,
That makes more
fantastic. And
perfect
then
sense.
your new book is coming out with Broken Sleep. When is that?
Um,
Do you have a date, or you're
Soon,
out soon?
yeah, I have a day. It's with the editor at the moment, and Aaron is an absolute boss.
Yeah,
Just yeah. Any tips for any like poets out there that want to kind of like take their work to the next level? Find an editor that like gets your vibe and that is willing to kind of like entertain the weird experiments and things you do with language and the things that you're willing to try out. Because yeah, it's important. Like your editors and your readers and people willing to kind of just talk to you about your work
Yeah.
with love as well, because that's the thing. It's easy to be critical. It's really, really easy to be critical, but it's much harder to come to somebody and say like, I know what you were going for with this. Like I get the vibe, but I just don't think you've executed it in the right way. Why don't you try doing this? Why don't you try changing that? Just try variations, because I know there's something there. And like that's difficult, being that person who can kind of like guide someone forward, because you have to be. It's an actively confrontational thing, and for some reason we don't like confrontation. We like to go, yeah, that was great, and then just never talk to the person again, which is really mean. We shouldn't do that. We should try and lift each other up, because you know we all rise together. So yeah, find an editor.
What a beautiful note to end on. I'm going to stop the recording now, but thank you so much, Adrian B Earle, everybody. What a wonderful pleasure. What a wonderful guest. Thank you for having me. Speak to you soon.
See you soon.